So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a forest on a surface that's imported into 3ds Max Design. And the surface is made in AutoCAD Civil 3D. So here I just have a camera view, and I'll change that to smooth and highlighted. There is a terrain on there, I should say a texture, that was brought in and mapped to the surface. I have one camera in here, and I have a daylight system for my overall lighting. And the daylight system, I'm using the MR Sun and MR Sky, so that I can use the Mental Ray rendering engine to give me my best results. So if I go into my render settings, and I'm going to go under indirect illumination and show you I am using Final Gather. Again, with the daylight system, using Mental Ray, Final Gather is going to give you the best results. Everything else I'm just keeping default. Go under my exposure control, I'm using the MR photographic exposure control, and I'm going to use the preset here of physically based lighting, outdoor daylight, clear, and just using the default exposure value. And I'm using the MR Physical Sky environment map. So everything is used with Mental Ray. Now the trees I'm going to use, I'm opening up Photoshop here. I'm going to use a diffuse color map for my tree, and that's just a picture basically of the tree with a black background. So that'll be one diffuse color map, and then I also have an opacity map, the white part being what will be opaque, which will show the tree, and the black around the outside will be transparent. So this will give me one tree. So it's basically using a billboard or a panel in, or a plane I should say, in Max. So here I open up Max again, and I just have a regular Max plane object here. And I just made length and width so it matched up with the dimensions of the image itself. And in my material editor, I'm going to add that diffuse color map. And I'm just going to use a standard Max material here. Go under Maps, and my diffuse color map, I click on the None button, and then click on Bitmap, and then just navigate out to where you have your JPEG or whatever file format you're using. So this is my diffuse color map. I'm getting all the color of the tree from here. And then I'm going to apply that material and preview it. Not really seeing anything yet, just because of my lighting. I just have a spotlight. I don't have anything really set up in this Max file right now. I'm going to go to Parent, and just click on that little arrow there. And I'm going to go under the opacity map now. Click on None, just like before with the diffuse color map, and click on Bitmap, and this time get my opacity map. This way, like I say, all the black will be transparent, so now it'll actually look like a tree. This is good for trees that are a little off in a distance. You don't want to render real close on these because you'll notice it's just a flat plane. And then I'm going to preview that. You can see with the opacity map added now it's actually looking like the outline of the tree. So I'll render that out. Again, this is for a little more of a distance. Out from a distance, you'll have a render of a bunch of trees, and I'm going to have several thousand of these trees put on that surface I was working on. So you can see as you get zoomed in here, pretty obvious to see it's just a flat image. But we're using this as just kind of a quick way to make a forest for more distance areas. You don't want to actually create the 3D geometry in your scene. So I'm going back into my Max file, and now I'm going to set it up and merge that plane object that has a tree in it. So I'm going to merge the tree in. Since I saved the tree as a Max file, I do a file merge and just navigate out to the Max file. And that's just, again, the plane. I don't need the spotlight or the plane that the tree was sitting on. I just need the tree plane itself, which has that diffuse color map and the opacity map on there. Click OK. Merged into my scene. Of course, it's a very small tree because I have a big surface here from Civil 3D. I'm just going to zoom in there, and I'm just going to move that into position so I can see it through my camera. So I'm going to move that out, put it in the view here of my camera. I'm not placing this exactly. This is just to make sure that the plane object and the materials merged properly. So I'm going to do a quick test render of this just to make sure that the tree merged properly. And again, the only way these trees are going to look realistic is if there's a bunch of them. So I'm going to end up with like 8,000 of them on this particular hill here. So it did come in and it worked fine. Again, you can see it's kind of flat, but that's no problem because we're going to have so many of them. And we're going to rotate them and scale them slightly differently too. So now my tree is ready to go. I'm going to move this original tree just kind of out of the way. I'm going to move it and just put it underneath the surface, just kind of stash it out of the way. I don't need to place this first one. When I use the scatter command here, or scatter tool, I'll be able to fix that. So I clicked on the surface of the terrain. It has a UVW map here in the modifier list here. I added a mesh select modifier from the modifier list so I could select polygon faces. So all I did was go under my selection modifiers and add that. Click on polygon. I have to select the areas of this surface where I want to scatter the trees. So I don't want the trees scattered all over the site. I just want them in this particular area. So I'm just selecting my polygon faces here. And a lot of times you got to change to a perspective view, rotate around, really get the area you want. So this is where my forest is going to go. I don't want it to go way off in the distance. I'm trying to save memory resources. That's why I'm using this particular plane object instead of actually the 3D geometry of a tree. So I have all those selected. Now I'm just going to go into my create panel and get my tree selected again. So my tree plane object has to be selected because that's what I'm going to scatter across the surface of my terrain here. So I'm going to go under compound objects and click on scatter. Scatter is going to let me randomly scatter that tree along those polygon faces that I had selected on the mesh. So here I go under distribution object. So I click on pick distribution object and then I just click on my surface. In this instance the object is called topography or topology. So as I click on that under objects I have my source and distribution objects. I know they are linked properly. Now I go under the source object parameters and I got to tell it how many trees do I want. I'm going to start with a smaller number just so I can find the trees and make sure they work before I put thousands of them on there. So under duplicates I'm going to start out with say 100 trees. So under source object parameters and duplicates I'm going to put in 100. This way I can find them, make sure they're scattering properly, double check all their settings, render it real quick just to make sure everything's working. And under the vertex setting here I'm going to add maybe 0.2, add a little more random elements to it. And animation offset I'll just make that a 1. Just trying to add some random elements to our distribution here. So those settings are in there. Now it did the duplicates, I just can't see them. I'm switching my camera view to wireframe because you're only going to see these plane objects when you're in the wireframe mode. So I had to use selected faces only to be able to see those objects and to get them on that mesh that I had selected previously. And I got to turn perpendicular off because the trees were in the proper position. So I just had to make those two changes. And then my distribute using even, I'm just going to keep it an even distribution. Under my transforms, I'm going to give a rotation in a Y direction. Again, just to add some random elements to their locations, I'm going to go 30 degrees. You can see how it rotates the different objects that are scattered there in the viewport. I have a local translation I could change, other settings I can change. I'm just going to leave those as the default. Under scaling though, I'm going to change that also. So X direction I'm going to go 60% and Y I'm going to go 60%. Just again add some random elements in there so everything's not looking the same. Sits there flat objects would be very noticeable if they were all sitting very flat in the same, the faces were in the same position as in the camera view. And I'm going to do a test render. With only 100 trees, won't take me super long to render. You definitely get a performance hit when you do use this method. Much less though than if you were putting 3D tree mesh actually in there for every tree. So it's looking pretty decent. I'm getting some shadows. Trees are showing up. So it's looking good so far. I just need a lot more trees. The only way it's going to look more realistic is if I really have a dense quantity of these trees, particularly since it's a billboard object. It's just a flat plane for each one of the trees in there. So everything looks good. Shadows are working. Not getting any obvious distortions in there or anything. I'm going to close out of there. The only change I'm going to make now is in how many duplicates I want. And again, this is when you're going to see a performance hit. So under duplicates, I'm going to go to 8,000. And with 8,000 trees, I'll be able to render that out and to really get my forest look. So hit 800 or 8,000 and then render it. You can see how many more show up in my viewport there. And then I'm going to render that out. And then the end render there. Again, you are going to take a performance hit. On slower machines, it's going to take quite a while. But you have a little different color, different angles, different shadows going on in there. The diffuse bounces I could have set higher, but it would have taken longer to render. Well, that gives you a nice quick forest using a Civil 3D model.